Welcome back to Talking Dragon Age, the show where I talk about Dragon Age. Today, we're discussing the Scaled Ones. Okay, first of all, I have to comment on Bioware's apparent fetish for the word one. Let's go down the list. The Scaled Ones, the Forgotten Ones, the Elder One, the Forbidden Ones, the Empty Ones, the Highest One. I'm actually a little impressed by this. I think I'm missing a few too. Anyway, this episode is about the strange, seemingly reptilian race of monsters found in the Chronicles of a Forgotten War codex. First, I'm going to read the whole story aloud, and then try to narrow down a list of what they really were.
Commander Othan told us to move out. He didn't give details, only that there'd been attacks north of Cadash and the Crown was sending reinforcements. Father grabbed our axes and we were off. I was a boy then, puffed up from a few victories in the provings. I didn't know what was going to be taken from me, but I would find out. The journey to Cadash was long and tiresome. Bored soldiers make poor drunks at camp. Father and I kept to ourselves, though I admit I longed to lose myself in a pint of ale, if only to have something to do other than sharpen my axe. A day after leaving Cadash, we noticed a change. The deep roads were practically abandoned. Torches would suddenly go out, leaving us to stumble through the dark and trip over discarded caravans. Then came the attacks, hard and fast. Father was one of the first. We heard breathing, slow and heavy, from a creature much larger than us. Father held out his arm and grabbed in front of my armor to make me stop. I saw its shadow move, darker than the darkness, and then my body jerked forward, and left my father's arm hanging, still grasping my chest plate. The Scaled Ones. I can't remember who came up with the name, but it stuck. Drogue had been lighting a torch when one attacked, and we finally caught a glimpse of something other than shadows. In the flame's light, we saw a man's body, like those of the Imperium humans, but covered in scales. It wore armor, and even had a dagger hanging from its hip. Its jaws wrapped around Drogue's face and twisted. The crunch of his neck breaking seemed to echo down the deep roads. The torch fell from his hands, and we lashed out. I swung my axe with all my might, but it bounced off the Scaled One's armor, the impact ricocheting up my arms. It let out a roar. Then more attacked. From the light of the fallen torch, I guess there was a score of them, all wearing armor and carrying weapons as sharp as their teeth and talons. The one that killed Drogue barked orders I didn't understand. I kept swinging. Othan, the best of us, made the first kill by splitting a Scaled One's head open. There was a strange silence, as if after an upset in the proving grounds, and it hit me that these beasts were not used to seeing one of their own die. Drogue's killer growled and stamped out the torch. The Scaled Ones retreated into the darkness. Our bodies screamed for rest, but Othan pushed forward. Now that he'd seen the enemy, our commander wanted to use the Scaled Ones' tactics against them. Go on the offensive. He left guards with the wounded and led the rest of the company to scout ahead for where the Scaled Ones were hiding. After marching in darkness for days, we finally saw an amber light flickering in the distance. Othan signaled everyone to hold and waved me forward with him. We proceeded slowly, wary of the possible guards. Othan nodded toward an overlook. I climbed with bated breath, terrified that the Scaled Ones would hear the echo of my boots scraping against the stone. I felt little relief when we reached the top. The Scaled Ones had set up camp at an intersection in the deep roads. In the center, there was a golden altar fashioned in the shape of fire. A chill swept through me. On the tip of each flame hung the corpses of those we'd lost, including Father and Drogue. They'd been drained of blood, leaving only bone wrapped in gray skin. A robed Scaled One stood before the altar. Its voice was different from the others, softer, almost feminine. It chanted and raised a basin of blood towards the altar. The other Scaled Ones bowed low. The robed Scaled One produced fire from its palm and mouth and ignited the blood. Othan grabbed my forearm and motioned us to climb down. We returned to the rest of the company, where he relayed what we'd witnessed. We would rest for an hour, regain our strength, and strike. The memory of Father's sagging, emptied face kept me awake. The hour passed slowly, but it did pass. Othon led us down the path to the overlook. I readied my axe for blood and steeled myself for the sight of the altar. But it wasn't there. The camp, Father, Drogue, the scaled ones, all gone. Only the basin remained, charred around the edges.
Okay, couple of things I want to talk about. First, this all certainly took place before the First Blight. More than that, it seems like this is before the destruction of Cadash. The company went there because of reported attacks nearby, and seemed like they stayed in the city for a little bit before heading out further. Because we can't know for sure precisely when the elves were taken into the Tig, or how long after that the dwarves destroyed it, it's hard to extrapolate when exactly this took place. That said, I want to talk about the ritual at the end. More specifically, what happened? Did they teleport somewhere? Did they pass through the veil? Did they disintegrate themselves? Did they finish the ritual, then pack up and leave? What was supposed to happen? Also, why is this the only mention of such creatures? Did they fall with the rest of the deep roads, or did they find a safe harbor like the Shopper Tall? I honestly have no answers, but I somehow doubt that this is the last we'll hear from them. So, most likely they survived the ritual, and didn't bother the dwarves again because they already got what they wanted. And they probably somehow survived the Blight, because otherwise there should be Darkspawn versions of them. Anyway, let's talk about the Scaled Ones themselves, physically. They're apparently very large, they have scales, they're humanoid, and their shadows were described as darker than the darkness. They have weapons and very durable armor, but mostly attack with their teeth and claws. They used their own language, and they had the initiative to retreat after seeing one of their own die. Then they performed some kind of ritual which involved fire breathing and blood, and they also bowed to what appeared to be some sort of priestess. So now we want to look at what they could possibly be. Here's a list of all the culprits I can think of, and here's the criteria that they need to match. Well, we can rule out dwarves because they don't match any of the criteria, and the elves don't match much either, so them too. How about Qunari? Well, this happened before the First Blight, so the Qunari weren't in Thedas yet, assuming they even existed. More on that in another video. Even so, this happened near Cadash. The dwarves had only been walking for a few days. Although the deep roads would still have all been connected, the Qunari would have had to travel an enormous distance to get there, and somehow not have encountered any other civilization along the way. Also, they don't have scales, which is like the most important thing. They also don't attack with their teeth and claws, unless they're savage like the Talvashath, but based on how they retreated and the following ritual, I don't think they were. How about the Fex? Well, if you don't know, the Fex are a race native to Parvalan. When the Qunari landed, they were conquered and converted to the Qun. Well, they're kind of in that same boat as the Qunari, where they would have had to come a very long way to get there. However, we know so little about them, so they might be large, they might be humanoid, they might be scaled, they might have mages, they might have weapons and armor, they might attack with their teeth and claws, they probably speak an unknown language, and they are sentient. So I'd say that's enough to pass them. I think the same can be said for the Kossith, but like the Qunari, they would have had to come even further than the Fex. However, in the world of Thedas, it is said that a group of Kossith were in the Qunari wilds and eventually became the first ogres. Because we don't know when exactly the Forgotten War took place, save that it was before the First Blight, I think it's possible that they were there. So I'll let them slide. So how about Darkspawn? Well, again, the Blight wasn't there yet. I mean, it was there, but it wasn't there. You know what I mean. I suppose some of them could match the description, but Darkspawn wouldn't typically be intelligent enough to retreat when one falls. Destruction is all they care about. Unless they were emissaries, which they weren't. The ritual then wouldn't make sense either. Why would they all bow? And why would the one in robes have a softer voice? Okay, two left. Some spirits could potentially fit the description, and some of the more powerful ones may have had the presence of mind to retreat. But what would that make the robed one? It had scales too, so I don't think it could have been a mage that would have summoned the others. It would have to be the same species. That said, spirits could explain why the torches would suddenly go out, or why the deep roads felt different, but I don't know that that's enough to pass them. Alright, humans. Not really sure what to say here. I guess I'll start with what Cassandra says on the Reaver specialization.
Dragon hunters were once revered in Navarra, and the Pentaghasts were the most famous. Many of my family became Reavers, harnessing the power of dragon's blood against their quarry. But each one went terribly insane in the end. Eventually it was forbidden.
They all went mad.
It was their own doing, I understand. Greed drove them to use more and more. The blood deformed them, caused growth, scales, things of that nature. They became enraged by little things.
So, she very casually slipped in that thing about the scales. I don't think that's enough. I think that is very important information for dragons, and I may explain why in another video, but for the scaled ones, nah, I don't think so. Also, even then, did they really match most of the criteria? I mean, the armor was so strong it caused a dwarven axe to just bounce off. Where would they get that? And if they were going insane like the other Reavers, that might explain why they attacked with teeth and claws, but then the ritual and retreat wouldn't make as much sense. So I'm gonna say it's not humans, but that's just my theory. Okay, so these are the options for us. Vex and Kossith, solely on the grounds that we don't know enough about them to rule them out. But there's something here I skipped, and I'm sure many of you are already thinking of it. This. If you don't know, this is an Elven Mural found in a few Elven ruins, presumably painted by ancient elves. So these things were probably out and about in Elvenan. Now, when I first saw this during a subsequent playthrough, the scaled ones were my first thought, and I was evidently not the only one. But we can't assume anything. We can't just assume off the bat that this is what the dwarves encountered. It does match the physical attributes, except for the lack of armor, but the elves are painted naked too, so. At first, I thought it had a shield on its back, but it looks more like those are just circular markings. But what do they mean? Maybe nothing. Maybe they say more about the elves than they do the creatures. Regardless, these things are enigmatic, so they could be the scaled ones, they might even be the Vex. I don't think they're Kossith, just based on what we do know about them, but that's just me. In short, I'm not sure what these things are, but we know who probably does. But, speaking of elves, there's something else I want to bring up. Do you guys remember this? The ancient phylactery found in the Brazilian ruins in Dragon Age Origins. It shows flashes of a battle, humans and elves running from something. Its memories are faint, but they appear to be dark and terrible. It also shows that the humans built the place, but the temple is definitely elven. So, were those the scaled ones? Was it the Blight? When did it happen?
Those are excellent questions. We'll have to find out, won't we?
You know, it's entirely possible that the scaled ones are just a brand new thing that has nothing to do with the Vex, or the Kossith, or the paintings, or the phylactery, but this was still a fun video to make, and I'm glad I got my thoughts out. If you guys have anything to add, or just ideas for the show, please let me know in the comments. That's it for now, guys. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, Tala Nadas.